Welcome to the Explainer. You know, video games have always been a medium that pushes boundaries, right? But every so often, a developer drops a title that literally makes players and critics stop dead in their tracks and go, wait, are we really doing this? Today, we're exploring the top 10 times video games crossed a moral line. We're looking at those highly controversial titles that made the entire world question the very boundaries of interactive media. Okay, so let's dive straight into this core question. When does interactive media actually cross the line from boundary-pushing art or, edgy entertainment into something that sparks widespread global outrage? In this explainer, we're going to look at games that basically forced players to commit horrific acts, exploited real-world tragedies, or made deeply uncomfortable ethical choices completely unavoidable. But hey, before we kick off this countdown, I need to share an absolutely crucial disclaimer. We do not endorse, and we certainly do not condone, the games on this list. Our goal here is simply to impartially examine their existence as historical media artifacts and really unpack the intense, very real debates they sparked. These titles exist, the controversies definitely happened, and understanding them helps us grasp the evolution of digital media. All right, kicking off our countdown at number 10, we have Spec Ops: The Line. This 2012 title completely subverted the military shooter genre. It deliberately manipulates you. The game's most infamous moment literally forces you to use white phosphorus to clear out an enemy position just to progress. And here's the gut punch. Only after you launch the attack do you discover that many of the victims were innocent civilians, including women and children. Rather than glorifying war like a lot of its contemporaries, it crossed a major line by making you feel personally responsible for a devastating war crime. It's truly one of gaming's most profoundly uncomfortable moments. Moving right along to number 9. Coming from a massive blockbuster franchise, 2009's Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 included one of the most heavily scrutinized missions ever created. It's called No Russian. In it, you infiltrate a terrorist organization and essentially participate in an airport massacre. Now, while the game does let you just walk through without pulling the trigger yourself, innocent people are slaughtered all around you regardless of your choice. Very few mainstream games had ever placed players in the middle of a mass civilian shooting like this before. It crossed the line so significantly that several countries removed the level entirely and others forced players to skip it altogether. Now, number 8 takes indiscriminate violence to an absolute extreme. Released in 2015, Hatred is a game with almost zero story. The protagonist just kinda hates humanity and decides to murder as many innocent people as possible. Schools, quiet neighborhoods, city streets, they all become arenas for just totally indiscriminate violence. By stripping away all context, narrative, or even satire, Hatred was designed almost entirely around the act of mass murder. This led critics and players to really ask whether pure shock value had become its only purpose, totally pushing the boundaries of what platforms were even willing to host. Down to number 7. Taking a totally different approach, 2003's Postal 2 crossed the line by gleefully embracing offensive cruelty, but under the guise of dark humor. It lets you commit countless acts of senseless violence while just trying to complete mundane daily errands. We're talking about urinating on people, kicking severed heads, and, notoriously, using cats as weapon silencers. Postal 2 crossed the line by making a massive interactive joke out of extreme cruelty. Its total lack of boundaries and unapologetic nature made it one of the most heavily banned, fiercely debated games of its entire era. Let's look at number 6. Renewing massive media debates about the real-world impact of violent video games, Rockstar North's Manhunt tasks you with executing gang members using terrifyingly everyday items. Think plastic bags, shards of glass, baseball bats. But what truly crossed the line here was the game's reward system. The executions actually became notably more graphic and visceral depending on how long you held down the attack button before striking. This intense emphasis on realistic, drawn-out executions immediately led to outright bans in multiple countries. At number 5, we are shifting gears. We're moving away from pure shock value and getting into a highly contested emotional narrative. Unlike the previous entries on our list, 2020's The Last of Us Part 2 doesn't just hand you violence for cheap entertainment. It forces incredibly uncomfortable empathy. The game makes you violently fight beloved protagonists, and then, bam, radically shifts perspective, forcing you to experience the story from the exact viewpoint of your enemy. The violence here is intensely personal. The victims scream, and the consequences are heavily felt. It crossed a line for many, not by being a mindless revenge fantasy, but by forcing players to confront the agonizing emotional cost of every single violent act they committed. It made you feel heavily complicit.
Entering highly sensitive territory at number 4.
Jumping away back to the early days of 8-bit gaming, Custer's Revenge remains one of the most deeply offensive commercial video games ever released. You control General Custer, dodging arrows to reach a tied-up Native American woman. The entire singular objective of the game is sexual assault. By exploiting both sexual violence and racist stereotypes for crude commercial entertainment, this game crossed a massive moral line decades before modern gaming debates even began.
Coming up on number 3.
Causing such severe international outrage that it permanently altered global digital storefronts, Repelé is a 2006 Japanese visual novel that centers entirely around stalking and sexually assaulting women on public transportation and in other settings. Rather than depicting violence as a tragic part of a broader story, Repelé built its absolute entire premise around sexual assault. This made it one of the most condemned games ever created. It resulted in widespread global bans and actually forced major digital storefronts to crack down and completely remove similar titles from their platforms.
Coming in at number 2.
Here, we look at the heavy ethical controversy of transforming recent, devastating reality into entertainment. Unlike fictional war shooters, 2023's 6 Days in Fallujah attempts to recreate one of the bloodiest battles of the Iraq War, actually utilizing interviews with real-life participants. However, it crossed a sharp moral line for many critics and the public alike. The controversy stems from the ethics of turning a recent real-world tragedy into an interactive game. It revisits a conflict that is still deeply painful for the living survivors and families who are forced to live with its very real consequences every single day.
Before we reveal our final entry, let's just quickly look at a few honorable mentions. Mortal Kombat from 1992 deserves a nod for introducing graphic fatalities that were so controversial they practically birthed the ESRB rating system. Rule of Rose from 2006 crossed lines with deeply disturbing themes involving child abuse. Rockstar's Bully sparked outrage for letting players navigate violence and harassment inside a school setting. And 2018's Detroit Become Human pushed boundaries by forcing players to decide who lives, dies, or is sacrificed in some seriously morally impossible, deeply distressing situations. And finally, the number 1 time a video game crossed a moral line.
The absolute most striking example of a video game crossing a moral line and igniting a complete firestorm of societal debate is Super Columbine Massacre RPG. Created in 2005 using RPG Maker, it recreated the devastating 1999 Columbine High School massacre directly from the perspectives of the shooters. You're literally forced to relive the planning, the violent attack itself, and even these surreal sequences set in the afterlife. The game sparked immense backlash and was even pulled from a major independent gaming festival. By turning one of America's most tragic school shootings into a retro-style role-playing game, it ignited a fierce, unparalleled debate about artistic expression, ethics, and whether some real-world tragedies must fundamentally remain totally beyond the reach of interactive entertainment.
So the crucial point is this, and I really want you to think about it as we wrap up today. The games on this list crossed moral lines in vastly different ways, right? Whether it was through shocking violence, impossible ethical decisions, or by recreating real atrocities. But when video games push boundaries to provoke these kinds of intense, deeply uncomfortable conversations, do they stand as a legitimate form of boundary-pushing art? Are they mere commercial exploitation, or do they serve as profound cautionary tales? It's a debate that extends far beyond the controller, and it's one that will definitely continue as long as developers keep pushing the limits. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning what you play.